Right, folks, have you ever wondered what people used to train like before the advent of anabolic steroids? Now, I've got a treat for you guys today. There's a study that I found from 70 years ago, which details how the competitors of the 1953 Mr. Universe actually trained. Really interesting. So I thought I would bring you these findings, and it's a really fascinating talking point. So firstly, thanks for making it onto my channel. If you have any comments or questions, pop them down below. And if you'd like to work with me on your own strength and physique goals, there's a link in the description. So firstly, I found this kind of stuff really interesting. One, because it details what people actually did. I always love those kind of studies, you know, rather than we are going to test a facet of a program like 1 minute versus 3 minute. I like the studies where it's like, okay, these are a bunch of top bodybuilders. This is how they train. Now, there are some things to consider, like there are trends, and I'll explore those later with the data I'm about to show you. But in general, I find it quite fascinating to look at how the top people of the day trained. And this is a time where it's generally acknowledged rampant anabolic steroid use was not part of bodybuilding at this point in 1953. We could argue that whether they're available or not, they probably were, but just in terms of actual rampant use, looking at the physiques, they probably weren't using that, you know, regularly. So anyway, look, talking about the physiques, here is a picture for you guys. Check it out. Does anybody recognize this young man? That is Sean Connery, a very young Sean Connery. Yeah, actual Hollywood Sean Connery in 1953 at the 1953 Mr. Universe. Now, you can see these guys look pretty jacked. So this guy here, third from the right, solid physique, huge, pretty damn lean as well. You know, not from today's standards, but these guys would all be considered big guys at any gym they go to. I mean, Sean's got some height on him, so they were big, tall. These are good physique competitors, and more than likely all natural. So that's an interesting point. So if you wanted to check out this study, it is called Recent Advances in the Technique of Progressive Resistance Exercise by McQueen in 54, to do with a survey he did from the 53 competitors. Now, what I want to do is I want to take you through the relevant sections of the study and let's talk about it. Let's see what we can see. So they detail a hypertrophy or bulk program as well as a power program. So they consider the training to be different. So at that stage in the 50s, they were already starting to separate from bodybuilding training versus power training. So this, firstly, they started off with like sets and reps. Now, in general, they found that most people trained 3 days a week. So if we have a look here, the essential characteristics of the bulk program is that all weightlifting exercises are done in sets of lifts or repetitions, the weight not being put down until the completion of a certain number of set or repetitions. So you see they're describing a set there. In fact, it is colloquially known amongst weight trainers as the set system. A questionnaire sent to the 17 area finalists of the 1953 Mr. Britain Physique Contest revealed that nearly all exercise on 3 days a week only, so Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Generally, that's what they did. Now, for the purpose of this, we can pretty much assume they all did the same or similar exercises. So let's say they did a full body routine, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. That's generally what we consider to be, because it was the same routine, Monday, Wednesday, to Friday. Now, in terms of what we've got here, we've got on average, people were doing about 3 to 7 sets. Now, looking at the data, it does seem to be mostly in the 3 to 4 range. This is sets per exercise, by the way. It does mostly seem to be in the 3 to 4 range. The higher numbers are like outliers. So you've got here 2, 3, 3, and then 5 to 10. Then you got 3, 3 to 4, 3, 3, 4, 3, 4, 3 to 4, 5 to 6, 2 to 6. So yeah, it does say mean is 3 to 7, but in general, like most people are around 3 to 4. Most people are 3. And in terms of repetitions, we've got 8 to 10, 8, 8, 10, 10, 15, 8 to 12, 10, 5 to 8, 8, 10, 5 to 8, 8, 6 to 15. So the mean range is 9 to 16, but in general, most people are hitting about the 8 to 12 range, probably more like the 8 to 10 range. So that's quite interesting. So these guys, so far what we know is they're using pretty much the same weight training session, using roughly 3 sets per exercise, and we can assume they're doing full body exercises, full body training. In practically every case, the weight used was the maximum that could be handled for the stated number of repetitions. For example, if 3 sets of 10 repetitions were used, then every set was done with the 10 repetition max. Now, this is quite an interesting point because they have made a particular case to say that those 3 sets were working sets. They weren't leading, building up sets. In fact, it says here, They follow up by saying, in the past, weight trainers used to start with a weight less than the 10 rep max and increase the load with each set of 10 repetitions until the actual 10 repetition max was reached. This method has become obsolete as it does not produce as rapid or as great an increase in muscular bulk as the set system. So basically what they're saying is the higher number of sets, actual working sets, have produced better results. So far, we've got a routine which is roughly between 9 to 12 sets per body part per week, because we're assuming 3 to 4 sets per body part done 3 times a week. All right. So that's pretty interesting. We've got that so far. And they found that got better results than doing 3 sets per week per body part, which makes sense. You're going to get something with 3 sets per body part, but they found they got much more with 9 to 12. All right, let's move on. Almost the only time when less weight is used is as a warm-up preparatory to the proper workout. Furthermore, experience has shown that if less than the 10 rep max weight is used habitually for considerably more than 10 reps and more than 4 or 5 sets are performed on one muscle group, then not only do the muscles fail to grow, but they might actually become smaller. So what they're saying there is if you're not training to your 10 rep max, you're going to get weaker. Also, if you do too much exercise, like 5 to 10 sets, 5 to 10, 4 or 5 sets on one muscle group, you're not going to grow as much. So they're very adamant here that it's a case of doing 3 sets per body part, and in this case 3 times per week within the context of a 3 times a week program, so full body. I find that quite interesting. They've narrowed it down pretty much. At least this is the flavor of the day anyway. At least this is the belief. Okay, and we have to trust that these guys know what they're doing because they're in good shape. In the experience of bodybuilders, such a system of high repetition, low resistance exercise, although usually increasing stamina and muscular definition, never substantially increases muscular bulk. So they say that the higher volume work is good for just increasing your general fitness, but it doesn't actually get you the size. Interesting. So I'm just going to summarize this as we go along, because I think it's good for you guys to keep up to date with what I'm saying as we go through this. So far, we're building up a picture of the flavor of the day in the 50s was you train full body 3 times a week, roughly 3 sets per body part, done 3 times a week, 3 to 4. And repetitions were roughly in the 8 to 10 range. I mean, it sounds sensible so far. So they have a special section here for the lower limbs. They said that the lower body is harder to build and you want to go higher in repetitions. So calves in particular, they note, are quite stubborn. So mostly you've got people doing, again, the set number stays the same, but the repetitions are more likely to go from 12 to 20 than from, say, 8 to 10, which is what you had in the upper body. So that, again, seems pretty sensible. You're looking at, we're going to be lifting heavy weights as heavy as we can, but we're going to be doing that for repetitions of 12 to 20. And in the calf range, it's more like 20 to 30. So, they're still going heavy. They're just going heavy in a higher rep range. Interesting. I mean, potentially you could argue it might be safer as well. You're handling weights which are lighter, but then, the fatigue might cause form to go off. But in any case, they've just found this is better for what works. All right. To the question, if you do your exercises in sets of, say, 8 to 10 repetitions, how often do you increase the amount of weight used? So the researcher asked them, well, how often do you try and increase weight? And in general, we've got here once a week, 6 finalists. So they would pretty much do the same routine 3 days a week. Every fortnight, 5 of them said that. Whenever I felt strong, 3 of them said that. Every few weeks, 1 of them said that. Between 1 to 4 weeks, 1 said that. And only 1 of those guys said they tried to increase their weights as often as possible. So that wasn't really a thing. Now that I find quite interesting. They sort of sat on the weight, most of the time. Most people sat on the weight for about a week before they improved it. So there was always progress. So they probably improved 4 times a month, but it was a case of, it was a slow. They weren't trying to push the progress. They were more likely trying to just get a good squeeze and a good pump and really exercise the muscles thoroughly, which I think is quite an important point, because while we do talk about progression a lot, mostly because people don't like adding weight to the bar, there is also the other side of the coin. If you add weight to the bar all the time, too frequently, you can get to a point where you're sacrificing form. And there's such a thing to be said for doing the same number of sets and reps better, perhaps doing them with less rest between sets, perhaps doing them with a fuller range of motion. We used to call it mastering the weight when I was younger. It's a case for mastering the weight. So that's kind of what we are seeing here. They weren't doggone sold on increasing the weight every single session, but they did have a regular progression scheme. Now, the question says, how often do you alter your lifting program? What the following answers? Every 4 weeks, one finalist. 4 to 6, 6 was 1. 6 to 8 was 1 finalist. Every 2 months was 3 finalists. So yeah, pretty much, and most of them said whenever I feel stale. Yeah, 8 people said whenever I feel stale. So yeah, they said here, the researcher followed up by saying frequent change in exercise routine by varying the type of movements and set of repetitions is essential to prevent boredom and staleness. Now, as we know, later on that sort of evolved into the heavy, light, medium scheme, whereas you purposely changed exercises and repetitions on heavy days and light days and medium days across the week. And that was an evolution which came from, at least I first heard of it from Bill Stahl in the 60s. So more than likely this was shortly after, and Bill Stahl was talking about changing the exercises and repetitions to allow for less staleness and to be able to do full body 3 times a week. So that was very popular back in the day. All right, next up. Okay, so just to summarize before we go on to this slide, because this is looking at exercise techniques, is quite fun. So far, we have built up a picture of most high-level competitors would be training 3 days a week on roughly 3 to 4 sets per body part. In the upper body, rep ranges of about 8 to 10. In the lower body, rep ranges of about 12 to 20. And they would add weight when they felt comfortable in adding weight, not before then. And there wasn't this massive push to add weight every session at the expense of form. More than likely, form was a greater impetus for perfecting your sets before you move up. But there was still a regular progression, so they still had an eye on progression. And they really felt like you had to train all out for those 3 sets. So it's not like you could have, it's really not like you should have be trying to go submax. They saw going submax in weight or doing too many sets would actually lead to a depletion of the muscles and would slow muscle growth. All right, next up is techniques. This is quite fun because they look at, you've heard of the Weider bodybuilding techniques. This is what they talk about. So, and the names don't often relate to actually what they're saying. So this first one is called flushing. Now, flushing you'd think is something to do with keeping the blood in the muscle. I kind of guess it is, but basically they're talking about here mechanical drop sets or extended or agonistic supersets. That's what they're talking about. So basically taking an exercise and then following that up with another exercise of the same muscle group. So that was what they call flushing. They found that to be very, very useful. I think the flushing refers to the blood that gets in the muscle. That's the idea. So it gets flush with blood. But yeah, it's the idea of extending a set, basically. They said here the key point is using the same group of muscles, the weights are raised and lowered, blah, blah, blah. So it would either be a different exercise or it would be a lighter variation. The next thing was called muscle cramping. Now, muscle cramping is often practiced immediately after flushing. Basically, what muscle cramping is you would do partial movements. It's kind of cool. They would either have the apparatus set up so that the weight was added and you would do partial reps, or they would just basically do like a shorter range of motion. So it's pretty intense. Like that's a pretty, if we take curls, for example, you might go from a regular set of regular curls to cheat curls and then do partials. That would be one set. Pretty intense. And if you recall the video that I did called Work Harder, when I was talking about the point that Jeffrey Verity Schofield made, which was that if you fail in very strict form, it's only failure in that strict form. It's not, you're not actually fatiguing the muscles perhaps as much as you think you are. Whereas with these two techniques, you are going to failure and then you're extending the set with a bit of body momentum and then you're doing partials. That's a pretty bloody intense set. And they're doing 3 of those per workout, per muscle group. That's pretty intense. So that's a summary of those 2 first ones. Next, they're looking at something called the peak contraction principle. They said that they like to have the machine set up so they were training at least one exercise where the weight was at its hardest in the peak contraction. So you look here at leg extension, and they also had this bicep curl, which you kind of pulled away from the machine, and it was the hardest when you were at the top of your the peak of your contraction. Interesting. Number 5 was cheating. Cheating, contraction of a single muscle to the complete exclusion of all others is most difficult, even for the expert at muscle control who spends many hours practicing in front of a mirror. Basically, what they're saying here is you should use a bit of body English. They said you can more thoroughly train the muscle if you use a bit of body English. Bloody interesting. There were all this researcher was doing was presenting the results of how these bodybuilders trained. And bear in mind, these bodybuilders who were training, they weren't exactly the creme de la creme of genetics. They were just not like today. Like today, there's such a wide pool of people who bodybuild that now we have guys like Big Ramy who are just 300 on stage, whereas back then you didn't have that wide pool of it wasn't that popular. So it's quite interesting. These guys probably weren't genetic outliers. They were probably just guys who enjoyed lifting weights. So yeah, they did loose exercise form. I find that interesting. Bear in mind, they did still say they use a full range of motion. So it's not like they did partials. They only did partial at the end, but they didn't mind using a bit of body English, which I think is pretty cool. All right, that is it. There was one more, which I've skipped out, called number 3, and that was basically just posing in a mirror in between sets. All right, so let's summarize what we've found out. This is how people trained at a high level in the 50s, and we can consider this to be before the drug era. In general, they were probably averaging about 9 to 12 sets per body part per week. Now, repetitions were between 8 to 10 for upper body, 12 to 20 for lower body. They liked training everything to a maximum. They also employed some body English. They employed some set extension techniques, so like agonistic supersets. They did drop sets, stuff like that, which is hard training. And they also did partial contractions at the end. So they really, it's this stuff that I've been talking about on this channel. They tried to get the most out of every set, and they did a limited amount. Now, do I think there is significance in the fact they trained 3 times a week and did full body rather than doing a bro split? I don't know. I'm not sure on that. All I know is that if you're training that hard, you can't do that much per session. So it may well behoove you to do a full body workout because you're able to give more into that one single set. So potentially, but I think more than likely it was just a flavor of the day, And as I say, as the lifting progressed on into the 60s, lifting became more widespread, and techniques like using heavy exercises and then light exercises and medium exercises became more appropriate. Because I imagine with a lot of these guys, if they felt really beat up, they probably did go a little bit lighter on Wednesday. They still made it to the gym. They just kind of worked out a little bit lighter, and they did what they could. So yeah, but if you perhaps weren't as genetically elite and needed more variation, repetitions, exercises could be changed, stuff like that, but you'd still work hard. Love it. Basics are reasonable amount of volume and take every set to the limit, work really, really hard. And without drugs, that was the flavor of the day in the 50s. Hopefully you guys have found that interesting. Let me know what your thoughts are on that hot take, and I'll speak to you next time.